Hello and welcome to our newest video. This is actually going to be the start of a new series entitled our Bestiary series, where we take a look at the various monsters of Dungeons & Dragons, ranging from the most iconic to the most obscure. In each video, we're going to be taking a deep dive into each monster and how it's varied through the editions of Dungeons & Dragons, and then focus on the mechanics of that monster in 5th edition. These videos should be particularly useful for players who want to know what kind of shit they're about to go up against in their campaigns, but also dungeon masters, especially those that don't really enjoy sitting down and just reading the monster manual and all the various maths involved. The point of this video is that I've done all that crap for you. And what's a better or more classic Dungeons & Dragons monsters to start us off with than Beholders? And actually, now that I think about it, answering my own rhetorical question, dragons are probably more iconic to the Dungeons & Dragons brand. But anyways, Beholders! So maybe you're brand new to Dungeons & Dragons and you don't know what a Beholder is. Well, to describe it in a couple of words, I'd say it's a large, fleshy orb, and stay with me, it has a large central eye, so kind of only a giant eyeball, and then off that eyeball are many different other eyeballs attached by little eye stalks, and the whole thing is a floating ball of death. Yeah. Now, where do giant flying eyeballs with other eyeballs attached to them come from? Well, that's just the question, isn't it? As an aberration, you may think that it comes from the Far Realm, which is this evil pocket dimension where things like Mind Flayers and Aboleths and other things we'll talk about in future videos come from. But they don't. You see, the origin of Beholders is actually one of the greatest mysteries in the Dungeons & Dragons multiverse. They aren't simply born in the typical sense, and have the ability to warp reality around them, giving them a very unique position, almost kind of like a demigod. With this, they've been described by the creators of Dungeons & Dragons as something of a bug in the system, or an anomaly that doesn't quite fit the rules of everything else in Dungeons & Dragons, and will likely never know exactly where they came from. Every Beholder has a superhuman intellect, and with this, the vast array of magical abilities granted them, and you have a very, very powerful opponent on your hands. Now, luckily, every Beholder has the power of levitation, which is good because I'd really rather not think of every Beholder rolling around on the ground with its eye stalks. But with this, they also all have the inherent ability of an anti-magic cone from their central large eye, and then various magical effects that come out of their various eye stalks, ranging from things like disintegration rays, telekinesis, fear effects, you name it. And you may be saying to yourself at this point, RPGMD, I only came to this video because you said you were going to go through the various editions of Dungeons & Dragons and not ramble on about various magical effects of eyeballs. Well, Johnny, you're right. Let's go through the various editions of Dungeons & Dragons and how it's evolved over the decades. If you're a huge nerd like me, what you'll realize is that unlike other creatures in Dungeons & Dragons, the Beholder isn't taken from Greek, Roman, or even Norse mythology. In fact, it's an entirely unique creation made by a man named Theron O. Kuntz with the help of Gary Gygax back in 1975. The initial idea was made as a part of the Greyhawk supplement, the first ever supplement for Dungeons & Dragons, all the way back in 1st edition. This initial description of the Beholder was pretty basic, but did set the groundwork for things that we still associate with Beholders today, like the term Eye Tyrant, the ability to levitate, and the various eye rays. Moving further through 1st edition, we again saw the Beholder appear 2 years later with the release of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and specifically with the release of the Monster Manual. Inside the Monster Manual, we got a more elaboration on the Beholder, and kind of pieced out more of what we think of a typical Beholder's personality in terms of its hatefulness, aggression, and paranoia. Kind of like when someone reads my diary. Unique to 2nd edition, the Beholder stat block included different ACs for the different body parts of the Beholder, allowing characters to choose what part of the Beholder they'd like to hit, and various different types would have different difficulties associated with it. 2nd edition also saw the first time ever Beholders were placed in various different ecosystems other than small underground caverns or the Underdark, and came to places such as outer space with the Spelljammer campaign. For such an iconic monster, the Beholder has actually largely gone unchanged since 2nd edition, No, we no longer have the various ACs to attack certain body parts. And no, we don't have free will actions like we did in 4E. But the thematic things of the Beholder are all still in place and have been in every edition of Dungeons & Dragons. The anti-magic cone, his constant levitation and inability to be knocked prone, and even the exact raise, sometimes with the exact same saving DC of a charisma throw, are found in 3.5, 4E, and even our most recent 5th edition. What we have seen change across the edition is more and more extrapolation of Beholder culture and just what's going on inside of a Beholder's mind in order to allow the Dungeon Master to better roleplay them in their sessions. We saw entire chapters of books dedicated to them for the first time in 3.5 Lords of Madness book, and even most recently in Volo's Guide to Monsters in 5th edition. So what should you expect if your party does end up running into a Beholder beyond the entire annihilation of your entire party? Well, like I said before, Beholders have a vast intelligence. Think of it as the human genius kind of dialed up to 11. And with this intelligence comes extreme paranoia. They are so smart that they often find correlations between two very unrelated events, even when there probably isn't any. And their greatest fear is that of another Beholder, because only another Beholder could possibly match their vast intellect. Because of this, they won't really see the adventurers as a threat, and are possibly just minions to be utilized, or the only kind of threat that they could pose to the Beholder is that they're obviously sent by another Beholder as a part of a larger scheme in order to usurp their territory. But RPGMD, if Beholders hate each other so much that they can't even stand to get near each other, how do they put their tentacles together in order to make more Beholders? Well, Johnny, while I'll never be able to get that image of tentacle swapping out of my head, there's in fact no tentacle swapping in Beholder reproduction. In fact, they reproduce by some kind of warped parthenogenesis. While Beholders fear each other so much, it is actually this constant thinking about other Beholders that brings them into existence. Like I said before, Beholders have the ability to warp reality around them, and at times when they're dreaming, they think of other Beholders and bring that being into existence. Now, this process is by no means perfect, and thus, if a Beholder is constantly thinking about its own mortality, it might make a variant of the Beholder like a Death Tyrant, which is a sort of undead variant. If it thinks of it as a flame kind of creature, it can create that, or an ice type of creature, it can create that. The possibilities are endless, and thus every Beholder is unique, because it was created through the dreams of another Beholder. Thus, there are more than 27 documented types of Beholders, and you could create any type that you'd wanted, as all are possible. Alright, let's say you're a better human being than me, and you're always your group's Dungeon Master. Well, if you're thinking about throwing a Beholder at your players, you should also think about where that Beholder is going to be, and the most likely location is a lair, or a kind of cavern system that the Beholder calls its own, which will make the perfect spot to murder your entire party. Beholders' lairs are a reflection of their paranoid thinking, and thus are designed to repel any type of attackers and deal with any situation, as the Beholder is constantly going over these possibilities in its mind. Thus, the lair is going to be full of various different minions that they can sick on their opponents, and obviously, traps. Lest you forget as well that the Beholder can fly, and their lairs are going to be specifically designed with this in mind, and your party is going to have a very hard time if they cannot get their feet up off the ground, as some aspects of the lair are going to be completely inaccessible. Watch out for various twists and turns throughout the lair, in addition to pit traps that a levitating eyeball obviously wouldn't have to worry about themselves, and even full stone walls that may be in your way of progressing, as what kind of obstacle is that to a giant creature who has a disintegration ray? With this as well, all of these combined do make it more than likely that your party may meet an untimely end before they are even able to reach the creature. And even if your group is lucky enough to actually reach the Beholder, he will still be able to use the lair to its full advantage by using various lair actions, such as creating a slippery floor or having eyeballs come out of the walls to shoot various rays like the Beholder does himself. And let's say you failed to kill your party with the lair itself, and they actually did make it to the Beholder. well, they're in for a treat with the stat block of this immensely powerful CR 13 creature. In terms of combat tactics to play as the Dungeon Master, keep in mind that the Beholder is very intelligent, and thus it is not your typical troll or wolf that's just going to run after the fighter and bash on them. You have a lot of options to use as the Dungeon Master, and use them. The anti-magic cone should be focused in a strategic way that does the most damage to the party, and the Beholder is smart enough to know who is in danger of creating the most damage or is keeping the party alive. It may focus on the healer or the wizard in order to quickly down them with things like telekinesis, disintegration, or death rays. With this as well, keep in mind that you are a legendary creature with legendary actions and should use these to your advantage in order to interrupt the party's plans. The Beholder may know what all of these plans and their tactics are ahead of time. In its paranoid scheming, it may have learned a ton about the party, and if not, its superior intellect will often enable it to pick up on these aspects very quickly throughout this fight. Throw in the fact that the Beholder also has legions of different minions it can throw at the party at the exact same time it's fighting it, and your party is certainly in for an eventful encounter. Now, being something that has a vast intellect as well, the Beholder may know when it's outmatched, or may attempt to avoid conflict entirely. It may seek to use these adventurers as its new minions, and if the party is agreeable, conflict may be able to avoid it entirely. With this as well, if taken down to its lowest health, the Beholder may beseech the party to some sort of deal and use its vast magical powers in order to grant some kind of wish for the party. However, I would not expect a Beholder to keep its word and will likely immediately begin plotting ways to get out of this contract. And between all of that, congratulations, you've probably successfully killed your party. They are not likely to forget their encounter with the Beholder and are likely to avoid it when they re-roll their new characters. If you find that they do forget, however, keep in mind that there are more than 20 different new types of Beholders you can throw at their newly found level 1 characters. And that will wrap up our first video in looking at the various monsters of the Dungeons & Dragons multiverse. Stay tuned next week to see which monsters are best at decapitating your party and scaring them into coming back next week. Per usual, I would love you forever if you liked, favorite, or subscribe to my videos, and give it a thumbs up if you like it, and a thumbs down if you don't. You can find all of my previous content over here and over here. I'm RPGMD, writing you a prescription on all things dice, dragons, and gaming, and I'll be seeing you guys next week.